welcome to Raise Sensation. I'm your host, Dan, and in this episode, I am going to be taking a look at a few books having to do with Conan the Barbarian, with a special emphasis I'm going to place on the Conan comics, but especially the Savage Sword of Conan. All right, let's take a look. Okay, so here we are with the first book I'm going to cover in this video, and it's Conan the Phenomenon, The Legacy of Robert E. Howard's Fantasy Icon by Paul M. Salmon, forward by Michael Moorcock. And I am not going to spend as long on this book as I usually do because I'm going to talk in depth about two books. Well, not in depth, but I'm going to cover two of them pretty well. And then I've got a couple other things to talk about too. So let's get right to it, shall we? I'm going to assume, maybe wrongly, but I'm figuring that at this point, the kind of fan base I have here is already pretty familiar with Robert E. Howard and Conan. This is just a really good book about Conan's The Phenomenon, as they say, published by Dark Horse in 2007, which is a few years. Marvel lost the license to the Conan comics at some point. It hadn't been selling well, so they let it drop. And Dark Horse picked it up and started making their own Conan comics. So this book came out a few years later. It does, the introduction, which is by Michael Moorcock, does have a lot of images from the Dark Horse comics. And then the last chapter of this book, which is, where's Conan at today, is basically about the Dark Horse comics. So, obviously, at least part of the reason behind Dark Horse doing this book is to promote their own comics. But Paul has written a real book. This is not, a puff piece. It's not as in-depth. There's several books that cover particular parts of like say Howard's biographies of Robert E. Howard. There's several books out on the subject. Roy Thomas has written a ton of books about the Conan comic books. The paperbacks have been covered to death in different places, including many reproductions in Frazetta books. Frank Frazetta, who did the covers for the most popular of those books, those have been reproduced a lot over the years. But this is a good overall of all of it. And I think it's worth taking a look at. So let's just, like I said, I'm going to go through this kind of quick. I'm not going to take a long time. The first chapter is The Birth of a Barbarian. It talks about Howard. Here he is. He was born in 1906. He basically started writing pulps in the early 30s. He only lived to be 19 until 1936. That's 30 years. And then he took his own life after his mother passed away. So this covers that time period, that brief life of his, fairly well, considering it's just one chapter of the book. He's got a lot of personal photos here of Howard posing in swashbuckling action. Howard did a lot of stuff besides Conan, besides Kull, and besides Solomon Kane. He created a lot of characters, and he covered a lot of different time periods. They weren't all just set in his mythical Iberian age. So it's amazing how much he got created in such a short time. But this is concentrating on Conan. So let's go. Weird Tales is where most of the Conan stuff appeared. I think it might have been the only place while he was alive, except for he did try and have a book published someplace else. Well, he did have one Conan book published while he was still alive, the only Conan novel. So Weird Tales, Pulp Magazine, and one of the greatest, if not the greatest. Right away, he starts getting covers, and this is Margaret Brundage. Now, Margaret Brundage did a lot of Weird Tales covers. she was one of the most popular artists for the magazine. So if someone was going to do covers of Robert's stuff, it would have probably been her. But she was a great artist. She drew beautiful women. She drew cool monsters. So it's all good. Here's a bunch of them. This is the monster from the end of Queen of the Black Coast. Makes an appearance. That's a really cool cover. And that story is going to inspire several good covers throughout the years. There's some more of them. The Hour of the Dragon was set to be published as a novel at one point. The company that was going to do it went out of business before it was actually published, and then it was serialized in Weird Tales. And he did get to see it published by another publisher before he passed, though. So there's a great Red Nails cover by Brundage. I wish she had got to do the dragon that they fight at the beginning of that story, but oh well. Then the next year, the next chapter, chapter 2 is about Conan making its way into books. So here we have the foreshadowing as Frazetta cover there. This is Avon Fantasy, which was a little digest. And there again is the end of Queen of the Black Coast. Gets on the cover. They've reprinted some Howard stories during this same time period, so that's why that's in there. There was the first book Robert got published, A Gent from Bear Creek, which is a series of short stories, short cowboy stories. And now here we come. This is... These are the Conan books. And the thing I like best about this is looking at the way that Conan is dressed compared to how he comes to mind now. The Conan we automatically think of is the one created mostly by Frazetta, but then the flourishes put on it by Barry Winsor Smith and John Buscema. See, these are like these look like Roman kind of attire or gladiator type attire, Prince Valiant type work. Now that one there, that looks a bit like our more modern interpretation of Conan. That wild-eyed, looks like he's got on his fur kilt and giant sword. So yeah. So then the thing about the Conan is, the way I discovered Conan was I was a precocious child, and I've discovered Conan through comics because I had been reading. I was a huge Marvel Comics fan. Marvel Comics and horror comics, especially horror comics, meaning things with monsters in them. So I got the first issue of Conan. I had been reading Tarzan paperbacks already when I was a kid. Well, not just Tarzan, but a bunch of different Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff, because my local library actually had those. So when I saw Conan, and I was also a huge fan of fantasy films, like Ray Harryhausen's Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, the Italian dubbed Hercules film, which has a terrible dragon at the end, but any of that kind of fantasy stuff I really loved. So when Marvel was advertising Conan, I was like waiting for that comic to actually show up. I picked it up, loved it, found out it was based on these books. I immediately went to seek out the books, and that was in 1970. So the Frazetta covers had started coming out in the late 60s. So those were the covers that were there. And as soon as I saw a Frazetta cover, I was just like, oh no, this has to be the greatest book in the world. So anyway, so this is about these early books. Here's a few. There were a few, and I had some of these too. These were not Frank Frazetta. These were some of the few that they published at the time without Frazetta covers by Lancer Books, who was doing this, who had the rights to the series at the time. But the vast majority of them were, this is one of my favorite book covers of all times. These Frazetta covers, and I have so many books on Frazetta art because this artwork meant so much to me at the time, and even now. So I'll post links to some of the Frazetta videos I've done, going through some of these books. You can see some of his other stuff, but these are very well produced in here. Again, another great one. There's the man himself. There's that original painting. And so, just great stuff. Like I said, I don't want to take too long on this. This is, I think most people are pretty familiar with this. And then the next chapter is, he talks to Roy Thomas. Roy Thomas has many times talked about his struggles to get Conan into comics and the hoops he had to jump through and the way it finally came about. So, but that, even though I was very familiar with this story, and Roy Thomas has written several books that are print on demand. You can get them off Amazon anytime you want, about him going through every story he originally wrote for Marvel with Conan. So if you want to, you can read a lot about this comic. And here are some pages from the comics. Buscema, Barry Smith. That's what I saw. I looked at that. Look at that. The harpies from Jason the Argonauts basically flying over these. Just fantastic. And I loved animal men, animal creatures, stuff like that. All kinds of great stuff. There's some Gil Kane. This is the original painting that John Buscema did for Savage Tales. Like before Savage Sword, there was Savage Tales. There were 5 issues of that. And it was originally meant to be all different kinds of action-adventure stuff, not just Conan. But quickly Conan became the most popular part of the... So they rebranded the book Savage Sword of Conan. And Boris Vallejo started doing the covers. Now, Boris later, he got incredibly popular. He must have sold so many posters and calendars. I remember just calendar after calendar every year of his work. He started to get really slick, and I didn't quite enjoy them as much. But these early covers are just so fantastic. This is just such a beautiful... here I am. Let's see. I would have been 14 when this came out. And, monsters, these skeleton warriors, Conan with his giant bloody sword, and this beautiful woman that looks like Red Sonja, who we had already met in some of the other comics. Just terrific stuff. And I won't talk too much about this. I'm about to look at the other book I'm going to look at has a lot of covers. So I'll save the talk about the covers for later. Earl Norm, another fantastic artist. I'll talk more about him when we get to that. And so, great reproductions of this artwork. Then they have some stuff about the Conan movie. Now, I was very disappointed in the Conan movie when it came out. It just wasn't. It just didn't feel like the Conan, the Conan I wanted. Now it's become a huge phenomenon. I would say the vast majority of people who are fans of Conan, this is, Arnold is Conan to them. I didn't think it was dark enough. I didn't think the fantasy element was handled very well in it. I didn't think Conan came off as well. In the books, he's not this monosyllabic kind of guy, and everyone just takes it. Anyway, I won't go into that. I for better or worse, and I think in some ways Arnold, it helped make Conan much more widely known than he would have been without Arnold being in the movie. So, pros and cons. Then after that, let's see. So then he talks about some of the other things, like the Conan cartoon, which I've never seen an episode of, and some of the other offshoots, the movie that never was. And then here we talk about they talk about some of the books. There's been a lot of special edition books that have illustrations in them that have been done. Of course, they talk about the Dark Horse comic revival. This cover for the Del Rey paperbacks is by Mark Schultz, one of my favorite illustrators. I don't particularly like this particular painting. I don't like the way that this figure here seems kind of wonky to me. That's just me, though, I'm sure. But this Del Rey's Robert E. Howard Library, I can highly recommend if you don't have a lot of Conan. These 3 books are everything Howard did on Conan. They've got a volume they did on all of Solomon Kane stories. They got one that covers the Bran McMorn and Cull, and they also have Best of the Other stories, pulp stories, because he did a lot of different adventures stories of, adventure stories that were modern to his time of the 30s. There's boxing stories, there's outdoorsman type stories, all kinds of stuff like that we're not familiar, most people aren't familiar with. They also have one that's devoted to his horror stories. So definitely worth checking that series out if you don't have a lot of books yet. And then, like I said, it goes. The last part of it is about the Dark Horse comics. So there we go. That is that book. So let's get ready to go to the next book. 2 is the Marvel art of the Savage Sword of Conan the Barbarian. Marvel put this out in 2020, and like the title says, it's all about that original run of the Savage Sword of Conan the Barbarian. And it was only available for a short time. Marvel let it go out of print really fast. I'm not sure why. They might have only, it might have been the window between when Titan picked up the rights to Conan again, and that might have been why it went out of print so fast. And I didn't pick it up fast enough. I had to buy it used. Luckily, the copy I got is in good condition, but yeah, and the reason I didn't buy it right as soon as it came out is I read some reviews that were less than favorable. And I kind of, in my mind, I had wanted this to be all about the cover art of the Savage Sword of Conan. And some of the reviews were just saying, oh, they take random panels and pages from the magazines and they're just put out every which way. And there's some truth to that, but actually when I see the book, I'm like, oh, I should have jumped on this right away. Let me show you some of this. Now, I'm not going to go through and point out every artist, except I'm going to spend a little more time on the covers, because that is, quite frankly, what I was most interested in seeing reproduced. And the introduction is by Roy Thomas, again, the guy who brought Conan to Marvel. And he's told his stories many times about his struggles to get it through. He kind of talks a little bit about that again, and then mentions some of the great names of the artists who worked on these various issues. Here's a reproduction. In that other book, the Conan the Phenomenon, they had this without the logo and everything on it. But this is it, the Savage Tales. The first 5 issues of Savage Tales were printed before Savage Sword came along. And as you can see from what's on here, Khazar Kills, The Coming of the Man Thing, Beware the Sisterhood, which is about Amazon warriors, Amazonian warriors, and Tomorrow's Violent Voluptuaries. And Black Brother, The Man Who Lost a World, which is kind of like a blaxploitation takeoff. So only a couple pages about Conan in that first issue. But that would change quickly because that turned out to be the best part of it. Now, I had been reading the Warren magazines, Creepy and Eerie, etc. And so part of the reason that Marvel did this was to get in on some of the money that Warren magazine was making. And so they seem these are very pulpy. This is like the Warren magazines crossed with the men's adventure magazines, the men's sweat magazines at the time. And in fact, one of the most popular artists, cover artists, Earl Norm, whose work I really love, he was doing the men's sweat magazine covers. They were pulps. You can also call them pulps. I just don't want them to get confused with the 40s, 30s, and 40s pulps. Although they share a very similar timeline. So this is another John Buscema cover. And man, this John could have been doing the pulps. It's a wonder he didn't do pulp magazine covers, because there was money in that for a while, just doing those covers. Now we come to the, like they said, these random pages taken out of the comics. Well, to tell you the truth, I don't like that this page is so small, but this is a case where they photographed the pages and then they print them, and so they get the color, that off-white color of these the magazine had, and I think this looks fantastic. This gives much more mood to it. It makes the black and white artwork look a lot less contrasty. I don't know if that's the word, and I think it looks terrific. And we'll get to when I talk about the next book. We'll talk a little bit about that reproduction thing. And so, yes, these interior pages are just random. Would I rather have a whole story reproduced instead of just random pages? And in some cases, random panels? Yes, I would. There's the Neil Adams cover that, I had seen. I really liked a lot of the Neil Adams superhero stuff. I wasn't that into. I wasn't reading, I know he's famous for the Green Lantern and stuff like that. But I was aware of him because he had done covers for Tarzan paperbacks that I was buying and reading. And that's a pretty good cover there. Some delightful artwork here for, look at that. That's a great cover. I mean, a great splash, double page splash. The other thing I'll point out is that we have Boris Vallejo doing these covers. And I hope I didn't say this when I was looking at the last book. Now I'm not sure. But Boris became really a huge... He soon was priced out of doing covers for Marvel. But his later stuff I thought was too slick. The stuff he did, like the Julie Bell type stuff. That was all too slick. I didn't like it that well. But these early covers, that is just a fantastic cover there. And this is one of my favorite covers of all time, too. Here's I'm not going to point out every artist because there's too many good artists in this book. But Alfredo Alcala, when he started doing these Savage Swords, I was blown away by the hatching and the marks he was making. It's just phenomenal stuff. So this I want to flip through this enough so you get a good idea about whether you want to track it down or not. So like I said, there's a lot of pages. They do a lot of where they reproduce pinups. The Alex Nino, I didn't think Alex Nino was a great fit for Conan. I'm not crazy about this stuff that he did for Conan, but that's just me. A lot of people love it and wish he had done more, but another great cover. Frank Bruner, who, I'm more familiar with, a lot of superhero stuff, books that I wasn't really reading a lot. But that's a nice cover. And Gil Kane. Gil was a big Conan fan and he had wanted to do work for the Conan comic, but when it first started, they couldn't afford him. Conan wasn't selling enough yet, so it was only when it became more popular that they could afford to pay Kane to do some work. And now Kane's got his famous up the nose shots here, which he does quite a bit. These early covers are just so terrific. Man. And here's Earl Norm. Did I should have pulled that out, shouldn't I have? Hold on a second. Most of my Savage swords are in my storage locker, but I just happen to have a couple issues here, so you can see this Earl Norm artwork up close and personal. I don't know. Again, I wish these were full pages. That's the only thing. Look at that. See that? This cover is a little bit of a letdown because the original cheap cover on this slick paper pops a lot more. But more Norm. Richard Corbin piece. More Norm. So let me flip through here real quick instead of doing this. Like I said, I just want to give you an idea about what it's like. Now, Norm is, like I said, he did the Men's Sweat magazines. He also, I have a great book about the art of He-Man. Now, I was too old. I didn't get into He-Man. But I discovered the Art of He-Man book, and that showed that Earl Norm did a lot of artwork for publicity or for various promotional things. And Norm's stuff for the He-Man, they don't have women with their cleavage showing, and they don't have a lot of gore, but otherwise they look like they could be Savage swords. The monsters that he draws He-Man fighting are really cool looking. So that's a great book to pick up and look at for the Earl stuff. You know, he worked at Topps Bubblegum for a while too. You know, he's Earl. Let's see, where's the Earl? Not Earl. Norm Saunders. Shoot. There's another guy that shared a similar trajectory, you know, doing men's sweats and anyway. All right. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to wind this up because I think you've seen enough to know whether or not you're interested in this book. You know, as they go back through, there's a lot of different artists who only did a few covers, but really interesting work. So there we go. Let's move on to the next. All right, so the last book I'm going to talk about is Titan Press now has the license to do Conan the Barbarian comics. They've relaunched the regular Conan comic book, and they've also started doing new Savage Sword of Conan books. And they've also got the rights to reprint Marvel's comics. They can't put Marvel on the cover, but what they're doing is they're doing these omnibuses. You can see it's these giant things, and they don't say Marvel on them, but they have made them to look as much like the out-of-print version of the Marvel books as they could. So these are very, very similar to the ones that originally came out of these omnibuses that are out of print and going for wacky prices. Well, now you can get them again if you want. Now this is close to 1,000 pages. It's actually less than the original Marvel version covering these same issues because they do not have the rights. They didn't have the rights to do all the stories that were in the Marvel books. They could only do the Conan stories. So it is not everything that appeared in those. Now, the thing I'm going to say is, this does cover, trying to keep this in the same area as so my framing will be good. So it shows you what's inside them. There's the covers of the first 5 issues of Savage Tales. Like I said, that first one only had one story of Conan. Then it becomes very Conan-centric. There's some Khazar in there. They figured he was close enough that they kept him in there, although, again, not in this book. And then it goes into the Savage Tales. It says, what is this? The first 13 issues of the Savage Sword, I mean. And, all right, so there, I think we're back in the right section. So, one thing I'll say about these books here is they are, in order to keep these omnibuses the same as all the other omnibuses that they were doing, they've basically made these comic book size, whereas the Savage Sword, you can see, was a bigger format. So these are reproduced, the pages are reproduced a bit smaller. Like I said, this is over 900 and some pages. It's close to 1,000. So these are giant books. When I was reviewing the Adventures of Red Sonja omnibus, I was bemoaning the fact that it was not as big as the Marvel ones. And a commenter recently said below that video, "Oh, I hate these. I hate that. Kind of taking me to task maybe a little bit for saying I wish it was bigger, because it makes it harder to read. But I would like it. I would have liked it to be the size of this book, which is the size of those original magazines, and." You see how much bigger that is. It's a magazine size. But this Red Sonja, this isn't even as big as a comic book size. It's smaller than the Marvel ones, which are comic book size. So, and then within that, some of these stories were originally from Savage Sword, so they were magazine size, but now because of the formatting, they're even printed even smaller than the comic book pages. Because of the, to cut it down for the extra width. So these are really smaller, a lot smaller. That's all I was really talking about is this is just too small for reproduction of those things, I feel. So then you can see how much is in here. Just a massive amount of stuff. And then we get to the reproduction. There's the Frost Giant's daughter from that first issue. But I want to look at this. So this is, like I said, this is one of my favorite sequences from the Conan thing. The fight with the dragon, the Stegosaurus style dragon. And I want to show the difference between these. So here it is in the art book, done the original size, done from the photograph, compared to how it is here. So I think this off-white actually makes the black and white look better, and it has much more of a mood. I think this is kind of the contrast, the stark black and white on this really bright white page, I don't think looks as good. Now, in answer to that commentator's question for my other video about how big is too big to be comfortable reading, I would have liked, if you could have done this book at this size format with this off-white pages, but only do like half the size, like 500 pages, would that make it more manageable? I mean, I think that might be a good compromise, although then you'd have to do twice as many of these books to get the same amount of stuff, and that would make the cost go up a lot, because a lot of the costs of these books, if you cut this book in half and do 2 books, those 2 books wouldn't cost you the same as this one book. I mean, that's just not how printing works. And, runs and stuff. So I don't know what the answer would be, but, just be aware, this is not the optimum for these. On the other hand, even though these are pretty cheap, and if you look around enough, even ones that sometimes go for a lot of money, you can find a beat up reader's copy for fairly cheap, and you could get these things. But this is, I bought this just to have this, just to have all this at my fingertips. My personal comic collection is not in any kind of order for me to be able to find stuff. I don't have every issue anymore. Over the years, for various reasons, I've lost stuff. So that's why I bought this. I don't think it's the greatest way to read it, but then again, this is pulp stuff. It's meant to be a quick, easy read, and so I think, oh yeah, I love this stuff. I think it's, you're weighing those two things. Just keep that in mind when you're thinking about buying it. But just know it's a lot of great Conan stories. They can feel very repetitious when you're going through too many of these all at once. But, yeah. So there, I hope that helps out some of you Conan fans to decide whether or not you would like any of these books. And I'll talk to you again soon.